You're tuned in to RX Radio.
Friends, welcome back. Another episode of RX Radio. Back from, I couldn't even tell you when the last time we had Killian on the podcast. So I'm just going to call him a co-host because it's weird to call Killian a guest. So Killian Hamilton back on the show, coming from us live from Tampa, Florida. So Killian's taking a job as the Assistant Director of Performance down at the Compound, a.k.a. Yo Murphy Performance, a.k.a. the former House of Athlete in Tampa Bay, Florida, where we host L3 with Prescript. And this episode is all about speed. So speed development, talking about different phases of speed, acceleration, transition, max velocity. You know, Killian does a lot of work with the Combine group down there in Florida, practicing for the 40 and improving their skills and going to the Combine and going to the NFL. For those of you guys who watched, first sort of preseason games, we had a lot of our athletes that did their Combine with us that ran great times at Indianapolis, and a lot of that was to do with sort of Killian's handiwork. So this episode talks a lot about speed camp that we're doing. So YM Performance, Yo Murphy Performance, powered by Prescript Speed Camp, is a 3-day event that we're hosting in Tampa, Florida. If you go to thecompound.com, compoundtpa.com/speed-camp, or just go to the Compound site. You'll see it there just on the homepage. 3-day event with Yo Murphy and Killian Hamilton on the track, in the gym, in the classroom. Really like an experience of speed. So learning all of the mistakes that athletes make firsthand. And then learning how to correct them through, adjunct exercise, power and speed development in the gym and on the track with a ton of different drills and a ton of takeaways. So, this is not learning speed in a conference room or a boardroom or a lecture hall. This is kind of learning it, on the field of play, so to speak. So a huge shout out to Killian for kind of offering up his time and spending some time with us back on the podcast. This episode's all about speed development, just a small taste of what you're going to get. And if anyone knows Yo Murphy, it's rare that you can get him in a teaching opportunity. It's someone I've learned a ton from in my career. Been working around Yo now for the last 5 years at least. And, I continue to learn from him. So Tampa, Florida, Compound Performance, powered by Prescript Speed Camp, September 19th, 20th, and 21st. If you guys are interested in improving your coaching, especially around power and speed development, be there. Space is extremely limited. So all that website stuff will be in the show notes. Again, if you're heading straight there from this, it's compoundtpa.com/speed-camp. So you guys enjoy the episode. We'll see you out there in Florida. Dude, Dad's home. Dad is home.
I'm back.
Every now and then, just an absolutely ignorant clip of you will just make the rounds from the old studio days, and I was like, oh man, brings me back. You made a line about the word gorilla grip stuck in my head. Do you remember the clip?
Reverse gorilla grip at the airport.
At the airport, yes. He's like, mine like a steel trap, this guy. Well, I guess we should kind of do this. We're professionals now, you and I. So Killian Hamilton, welcome back to co-hosting the fucking show.
Yeah. I mean, this is like the 4th background I think I've had on this podcast.
Yeah. It's another thing I learned from you in the podcast was what the portrait of Dorian Gray was.
Yeah.
And you're living the embodiment of that metaphor right now.
Yeah, I think, and that's the thing is I keep looking worse. It's the opposite. I'm the portrait. I look worse, and my home is nicer.
See, I'm the opposite of the opposite.
Very
Both looks worse. I look worse, and I'm in prison. Actually, I taught from here, teach L2 from here, and someone was like, so I think someone meant to put like a direct message to someone else on the Zoom call, and they put it to everyone, and they're like, I'm worried about him. Is he in a parking garage? And I'm just like, the fact that that's possible in someone's mind, like, oh no, he's actually just doing this from a parking garage is pretty sad.
Yeah, but here we are. You're in the gulag, and I feel like I'm living in someone else's house.
We'll talk about it, man. So obviously, I don't even remember when last episode we did. We were both probably in Toronto.
Yeah, for sure.
It's been a minute. So you made moves out to Florida. Kind of bring us up to speed, because I think that's a good segue into what I want to talk about today.
I don't think we've done a podcast, since at least, but we were in Toronto, so, Combine's passed. So I live I work in Tampa, Florida now, right behind the airport at a facility some Prescript people probably know by now, Yo Murphy Performance. But I live north of there. I live in an undisclosed location north of Tampa.
Okay, all right. So you made the move obviously to work at YMP.
Correct.
And you've been the one kind of leading the charge, especially with the level 3 stuff, with the integrated athletic performance, speed development, all that, and with the level 3 being so heavy into the combine, which means heavy into the 40, and you getting firsthand exposure on all sides of it, right? Like you with your own sprinting background, you with a coaching background at all levels, and then you at a teaching coaches at all level background. So I want to dive into speed, because like speed is something that, I mean, we've been around this long enough to see and I don't even want to call them trends, because I think trends are, there's not a utility in a trend. Like we don't need bell bottom jeans. Like what do? We don't need these back. But like speed is always in fashion. Right, but it seems like in the last 5 years, speed development and the focus of track work across all sports has really kind of pushed up to the forefront. Which means in the next 5 years, maybe it's Olympic lifting resurfaces again, and we continue on the cycle. And the reason I don't like using the word trend is because I think it's all positive. Really, it's really exciting to see speed mechanics and speed development take its place back into sport training. But I'm curious, just like as you look at speed from so many different angles, like where do you start? And I think, given the nature of the podcast, from a coaching perspective, like when you deal with coaches and you're trying to like translate, like what is speed development? How do we move through it? How do we assess it? How do we progress it? How do we adapt it? Where do you start with a coach in speed development?
Yeah, so I think, I train this young kid 3 times a week. I just do speed with him. He plays baseball. He's from Taiwan. And I just do speed development with him. And he was getting frustrated today. And I explained to him, I said, listen, like when we train sprint mechanics or speed development, we're playing golf, while moving through space at 25 miles an hour, right? It's like all of these things really need to line up. It's like picking a lock, you know what I mean, while driving a Lamborghini. It's like the idea that, all of these mechanics need to fall into place for us to be able to produce the amount of force, the amount of power to move at a maximal velocity. And I think, when you said, like, where do you start with a coach? When I talk to them about it, it's forgetting entirely that sprinting has anything to do with moving fast. I think the first wrong turn you can make and you never get back on the highway is realizing or is not realizing that it has nothing to do with moving fast. In fact, probably has way more from a developmental standpoint about learning how to get into really good positions standing still, because we need to be able to understand the eventual position we want to be in, or the repeated positions we want to be in while sprinting. We have to do it slow, and the slowest speed we can move at is by not moving at all and standing still. So the first thing you need to do with speed development is completely forget that it goes fast at all.
Yeah, it's got to be a tough mental hurdle for people to get over, isn't it? You're obviously known as like this skill acquisition guy. How does that model fit? And where do you kind of start? Like, it's obviously standing still and teaching awareness and positions, but how do we kind of overlay, like, okay, when we talk about speed development, there's just different phases of speed, right? We have acceleration, and then some people talk about the transition. Most people are going to talk about max velocity. And then we have this overlay of like, well, it's actually a skill. We can start by moving, slow or stationary, and we can obviously incrementally improve speed as a byproduct of quality of position. But then we have this autonomous, or this cognitive associative autonomous loop. How do you avoid getting into too much of a heuristic where, for example, bird dog curl up side plank. Many coaches, when they start, they'll be like, okay, core work, we're going to start here, and then they start slowly build up. Where it's like, as you get your feet wet, you go, look, you walked in here, you don't have any disc herniations, or at least none that we know of. We're probably going to move 3, 4, 5 steps along. how do you grade that process of like, okay, I have someone come in, I can kind of do an assessment. What are the attributes that you're looking for to start to move people from some of the fundamentals and start to progress them as fast as possible?
Yeah, so I think, one of the first things you got to look at, or one of the first kind of limiting factors in speed development for anyone is strength. Like there'll be people that get away with it for a very long time, moving quickly and not being strong. These people just might be naturally gifted at just being faster individuals, right? They might have a long sports history in which, sprinting and running is a large part of it, and they might have built up this ability to be relatively fast. But the difference between them running, 4.6 and running 4.3, if that all possible, typically becomes limited at the point of strength. People's ability to absorb and then redirect force on ground contact comes down to strength. Can I put 5 times my body weight into the ground and ultimately continue to project myself forward? Or am I able to redirect those forces into the ground? I don't get pulled up into this vertical position. I don't lose stability. So big things right off the bat is, difference makers to not get stuck in a repeatable loop is really understanding where someone is from a strength perspective, right? How absolutely strong is this person? And a lot of just conventional general strength tests will describe this for us. We can look at people back squatting. We can look at a trap bar deadlift and understand relative to body weight, is this person strong or weak in a basic level? And then we can begin to create velocities or add a velocity to those displays of yielding power, right? So, our ability to redirect the force in a squat from heading towards the ground to moving away from the ground, that's a good example of it, but typically doesn't move at a high velocity. Then we can do something like a depth drop, where I've now increased the velocity as that person moves towards the ground. Am I able to identify and maintain position on ground contact? Then we can start to do things in which that person might do repeated hurdle hops, right? Are they able to redirect force once again with an added velocity and direction? And then are we able to do something like a triple broad jump for distance, in which that person now has to redirect even more maximal forces horizontally, right? So there's an added redirection of that force from a hurdle hop, which is going to be most vertical, to a triple broad jump, which is most horizontal, and then sprinting is just going to be that effort now repeated at a higher frequency.
Yeah, I think in the spirit of horizontal and vertical, I'd be curious if we just take this down the route of like, okay, we have acceleration. Let's look at kind of common mistakes from an athlete perspective and a common mistakes from a coaching perspective, and then we can kind of carry that through. Because whether it's the 40, whether it's the 60, whether it's the 100, whether it's the 200, we're going to kind of follow this arc of like, hey, starting with standing still, how does this usually start? It's like, well, you're going to start in some sort of 3-point, and then you're going to carry into your max velocity. So like from a coaching perspective and an athlete perspective, if you were to start at like the acceleration phase, or maybe even before that, like the setup, where do you start to see both of these camps go wrong most often?
Yeah, so, I think from a setup perspective, if we were to break down even just the 3-point stance in something like a 40, it's someone's ability to shift their center of mass forwards, right? So this is going to come from establishing a positive shin angle when both feet are on the ground. Now, typically in a 40 stance, someone will be, front knee down, their back foot, that knee will be down as well. Both hands will be in front of them. You'll see some people walk themselves back into position. Now, when someone goes from, having 4 points of contact with the ground to elevating their hips, oftentimes a big fault is that shin angle moves from positive to more vertical. And the minute this happens in the setup, we've lost it. There's no saving it from here, because the minute they push out, now they've pushed vertical. So being able to establish a positive shin angle and then reinforce and maintain that shin angle is initiated in the setup. So the way we can establish and maintain a forward shin angle is not by lifting our entire body up, in which our shin's going to move backwards, but it's by rolling our shoulders forward. So allowing our hips to move up as my shoulders begin to migrate forward or away, shifting my center of mass forwards over my hands. So in that setup, we really need to establish a positive shin angle and then learn this ability to lever our hips backwards and shift our shoulders over top of our hands. This is going to do two things. It's going to maintain our positive shin angle. It's also going to allow us, when we swipe that hand, when we initiate that sprint, and that hand goes backwards, that we have no other choice but to project horizontally. If at all my center of mass shifts backwards and my shin begins to go vertical, well, I have all the options in the world. I'm not at risk of falling down, so I can easily just stand straight up and down. And then we've skipped the entire acceleration phase altogether.
So from a coaching perspective, the cue of shifting forward rather than lifting the hips up and really having the focal point being like, hey, when you're watching a setup, the efficacy of the setup comes down to the ability to maintain the forward shin angle.
Correct.
Yeah, and if they're incapable of doing that, then they're likely getting cued into the wrong position.
Yeah, and then no amount of coaching after that first step is ever going to get you to that result, because we're already starting in the wrong position, right? So, one big thing we want to do, and this is where I said, really sprinting starts from standing still, is does an athlete have a deep understanding of what a forward shin angle is, or what a positive shin angle is, right? Are they able to get their knee over their toe or their shin forward in space? Are they able to do this repeatedly, and do they have an ability to maintain this? This is where isometrics come largely into play if we have enough time in that learning process, right? In that cognitive stage, a lot of isometrics could be used. Even a bent knee calf raise, which isn't conventionally isometric, is a great tool to use to start to adapt to identifying and maintaining a forward shin angle.
And when you see these errors occur, because it is something because I think we'll talk about the shin angle almost the entire way through the sprint. When you see that, is it more just a motor learning thing, or is it more just a relative strength thing? Like, hey, they've just never have learned to keep this shin forward, or is it, hey, they actually don't have the strength in their knee extensors to keep it, or is it somewhere in between? Like, how do you see that panning out? Because I see, if you don't have the strength, you're going to bias into finding your strength. You're going to push back into the hip. You're going to leave that shin angle a little bit straighter. How are you approaching that when you see it? It's like, okay, hey, don't do that. Do this, and they do that. It's like, all right, well, we can't hit the override switch. Is this a strength thing, or is it a motor pattern thing?
So I think at first I always go the route of it's a motor pattern thing. I don't think it needs absolute high levels of strength to maintain a forward shin angle. I think it's a position most people are so forward to. If you're a experienced ass to grass squatter and that's been in your repertoire for a long time, you probably have a really good understanding or perception of where you are in space when you get into that deep hip flexion, knee flexion position. But outside of that, we're using combine as an example, you and I have more intimate knowledge of this, but how often do we run into a college football player who spent the final 18 months of their college career ass to grass squatting a considerable amount of weight? Very rarely, right? They're parallel or above parallel squatting. If they are getting into deep knee flexion, it's usually Hatfield or belt squat, and it's assisted. And oftentimes when we watch these guys squat, we're watching very hinge dominant squat patterns, or very non-squat like squat patterns. So we're seeing guys who, this isn't even from a strength perspective or a motor learning perspective, but they're almost actively avoiding it at all costs. Now we're asking a guy to do this in an environment completely devoid of visual or kinesthetic cues. He's just out in the middle of the grass somewhere. And we're saying, all right, now that thing you avoided for 4 years or 8 years or 6 years, now get your knee over your toe, now get into a tremendous amount of dorsiflexion, and now manipulate the rest of your huge dumb body around that point of reference and push out of it. That's a crazy task to ask somebody who's actively spent a lot of time trying to never be there.
Yeah, so I guess moving from the transition, the first step, this is when you talked about, hey, look, if you lose that forward shin angle, there's no amount of cueing, there's no redemption, right? You're going to pop up. So I think for coaches to hear, like, hey, when you are coaching someone on that setup, and there's nuances past this, but I think if we got to think of, like, all right, where's the cash value in a good setup? It's like probably going to live and die in the shin angle. Right? If you can't shift forward and do so in a way where that shin angle stays positive, you're cooked out of the gate. Now, I think that as a reference point is useful. Now, when we take that reference point and move it to the first step, what are we looking for from, the time they decide to, the gun goes off and they take that first step and they come out of that 3-point? what are we looking for on the first step that's going to indicate success? And because and here's the thing, like when it's done fast, it's really hard to pick up on. It's not like squatting. It's like it takes fucking 3 seconds to do an eccentric. Like if this is fast, the whole thing's over in 4 seconds if you're lucky. Yeah. So where are you focusing your attention on the first step to get the most amount of like high resolution data about the athlete's position?
Yeah, so I think, the biggest thing we look for, and like you said, it happens really fast, but, getting everything on video, you look for an athlete in the process of getting to their first step, that first initial contact with the ground. You're looking for them to stay on the ground as long as possible with their back foot. So their back foot being the front initial foot. So if I set up and my right leg is forward, my right foot is forward, in that first step, my right foot becomes my back foot. I need to be there as long as I possibly can be to get full or close to full triple extension. And this is where triple extension kind of finds itself spoken about so often in athleticism. Is it's a place we need to get to for anything that projects vertically or horizontally. So for us to truly get that triple extension out of a 3-point or a 4-point or even a 2-point start, I need to stay on the ground a really, really long time relatively. And most athletes, when they're thinking about moving fast, are looking to get off the ground and move forward as quickly as possible, and it's going to reduce our power a ton. So the biggest thing we look for in an athlete's ability and early on to know, is this someone who we can coach to be faster? Can they find triple extension or close to triple extension of that back leg? And can they stay on the ground a really long time in that first step?
Yeah, it seems almost counterintuitive when you first see it, right? Like the idea that you're trying to keep that foot or that ground contact long in the stride as opposed to just getting off really quickly. Because I think one thing to highlight is speed comes from 2 points, right? Like it comes from your cadence, your stride frequency, and also like your projection, right? Like how long are your strides? And it just becomes basic physics after that. So once we take that first step and the front leg becomes the back leg and we get into whatever hip extension we can get into, how do you then, I think, orient your attention through the acceleration phase? Like, the cameras are helpful, but when you're watching someone sprint, you're looking at the 3-point, you watch them shift the mass on the start, you want to make sure that the shin is forward. The attention then focuses to, okay, as they take that first step, they're sort of going through their reciprocal arm swing. Does the back leg stay on the ground? Does that front leg that goes into extension, does that give us a good projection angle? As you move into subsequent steps, how do you like rank order your attention in real time to be like, this is the stuff that I want to see? We can go back and clean up all the nuance on the camera, but take me through the first 10, the first 20, the first 40 yards.
Yeah, so the first thing is, that first step needs to win a yard, right? And that's what we kind of always say is like, you got to win the first yard with the first step. Subsequently, it's like we need to get to 10 yards in 7.5 steps. And if we're going to get there in 7.5 steps, there's a good argument to be said that first, 3 to 5 steps almost need to look all exactly the same. They need to be these consistent, we would say, pushes, right? So that first leg kicks out, big push. That second push, you need to be in the same position you were in on the first step, because we know we're now going to win, again, a considerable amount of distance. That third step needs to be the same. That fourth and fifth step, it needs to be extremely, extremely similar through those first 5 steps, and that's what we look for. Even in real time, that's what I'm going to look for. Big shapes, big hip extension, that reciprocal arm motion that you talked about, the arms need to look like the legs. If we have short, choppy arms, we're going to have short, choppy strides, because my arms are the metronome. They keep time. They're the timing belt for my legs. The bigger I can make that shape in my upper body, the more assistance I'm going to have in maintaining a forward torso, and the longer I'm going to be able to stay on the ground. So I need this relationship between my arms and my legs to be similar. So after that first and that second stride, I'm looking for that relationship between the arm and the leg, the timing to be similar, and the shapes to be just as big.
Are there attributes that you see consistent with people who are incapable of doing that? Or is it just such a skill that it's like, look, all shapes and all sizes, everyone's going to struggle with these projection angles coming off of that first step? Or is it like, hey, you really got to watch, like big guys are going to pop up or short guys are going to have choppy arms? Or are there attributes physically where you're like, okay, not only of this what I'm looking for, but I can identify, just given my experience, that athletes of this size or shape are probably going to run into these problems?
Yeah, so, big guys are always going to pop up. They weigh so much. It's so much harder to maintain a forward torso angle at 285 pounds plus than if you're 185, right? There's so much weight moving anterior. When we talk about this all the time in PSL1, it's like, I'm going to want to move my center of mass backwards. All that weight heading forwards, feeling like you're falling is getting you closer to the answer. But if you're 300 pounds, you are falling. Like, there is no righting this ship. You're running downhill from start. So, big guys are going to want to pop up quick. Luckily, their race is won in the first 10 yards. So, we do, as long as a guy can get out and push those first 3 steps, we can typically win pretty well with those guys. Positionally, and not even anatomically. I guess one anatomical thing is, if you have a really short torso and long arms and legs, you're built for speed. The longer your torso is, the more of an uphill battle you have, because you now just have this huge thing that you need to maintain for. You get a short torso, it sits over the top of your quads, over your knees, no matter where you are in space. Long legs and a short torso, like if you're good at sumo deadlifting, you might actually be pretty sick at sprinting too, because anatomically you're just built for it. The engine that you have that creates speed is the longest lever in your body, which is great. And then your torso being short on top of it, there's a lot less to do navigating this torso angle that wants to pop up. We had a linebacker this year who ran incredibly fast, but has a long ass weird torso and not super long legs, and he struggled with even getting into the start position. So we needed to take a step back as a team and go, he can't even get in the start position. So why don't we, it was almost like the KK rounded back deadlift. If you're gonna fuck it from the start, just fuck it from the start. You know what I mean? Like, you're gonna get in this weird shrimp, just get in the weird shrimp, and let's just work at being strong at maintaining this weird shrimp position, because at least it takes your big skyscraper crane torso, and at least it makes it this short, right? So that was a strategy we used for a long torso, short-legged guy to make him more like the short torso, long-leg guy. I was like, just hunch over. It might actually win in this very specific instance. But long legs, long arms, short torso, great anatomy for sprinting. If you're big and fat, a lot of reasons why it's going to be bad. And you have big, long, goofy torso, probably also not going to be great. And to your point about short guys, as much as they'll have a choppy arm swing, like you said, it's a combination of stride length, power, and then frequency. You just hope the short guy is really twitchy and can get to the ground effectively as frequently as possible, and typically, he'll help to win that battle in the back half of the race.
So I mean, let's jump to that, because I think what people see, the bulk of the race is the upright portion of the race, right? And that's true of the 40 in most cases, unless they're really fast and they're just staying low the whole time and they're accelerating right through the line. But for most races, 40, 60, 100, what people see is the more upright component. So as we come out of the acceleration phase, what are you looking for in the transition from that horizontal pitch to that more vertical pitch? What are things that you're looking for? Where are you paying your attention to, and what goes wrong when you're paying attention to it in those that aren't doing it properly?
Yeah, so I think a big thing you look for, and it's such a hard thing not to explain, but you say it and people are kind of like, well, it doesn't take me anywhere, but is smoothness. There's so many people we see that probably are overreaching for a low position, which is not really what we're looking for, and we can get into that. In the acceleration phase, I'll say it like this. In the acceleration phase, a lot of people are coached to stay low. And it's just a miscue in the right direction of the goal. The goal is forward shin angle, forward torso angle. The idea of staying low, running under a fence, has nothing to do with speed development. But if you're taught, or you're cueing yourself to stay low or dive through the first 10 yards, Typically, when you can no longer hold that position, you pull the parachute and you get right up too early. It's a really janky, unsmooth, crunchy peanut butter transition to max velocity. What we want is I would sacrifice a more forward torso in acceleration for a smoother transition to max velocity. It's not ideal, but there are movement and performance strategies we could put behind a slightly more vertical torso to have that guy win if he moves smoothly through that transition versus a guy who goes from here diving into the ground to just standing straight up and trying to win. So we want smoothness, and smoothness to that point has a lot to do with just timing, rhythm, and body placement. So being able to organize your body in space. So in those mock drills we do in a warm-up that don't seem like they have tremendous carryover to sprinting, something like a properly executed B skip or a hopping A switch or single leg A skips, all of these drills will allow us in a controlled environment to teach the ability to snap down and pull back under our center of mass. If we're diving too far forwards, we start to get that Jeep Wrangler in the mud sensation of spitting out behind us. If we end up leaning behind our center of mass, we start reaching with our toes and applying the brakes too early. If we can learn to get that foot to strike directly under center of mass in mock drills, that transition becomes much more smooth because that shin angle we talked about moves like those windshield wiper blades. As our torso comes up, that shin angle comes to match, and my foot starts to strike underneath, and it allows me to recycle effectively and efficiently.
So when you see a smoothness issue, and the transition is this, someone runs the sail up the mast, and all of a sudden the guy's upright. What are you looking for to remediate that issue? It's like how do we address that? Because some of the stuff with projection angles and ground contact, it's like, okay, you're in a bad position, or there are things that seem more quantitative, like you're not strong enough, you're not patient enough, which is a large part of the problem. But when you say smoothness, when you say that to an athlete, how do you then look to correct that qualitatively? Like, hey, you're just kind of popping up. Where are you looking, whether it's an exercise in the gym, like, hey, maybe you're just actually lacking X, Y, or Z, or maybe it's an awareness issue. What are your interventions when smoothness is the problem in the transition?
Yeah, so I think that's where a tool that's often prescribed incorrectly or just prescribed too often, something like resisted sprinting becomes super valuable when we're at the field. When we have kind of two abilities to resist or constrain someone when they move through sprint drills. And the easiest way to think about it is if we talk about a sled, if a sled is in front of someone, it's teaching a position. If the weight or the sled is behind them, it's slowing them down. So that's the two things we want to think about. And I think it's important to think that because whenever you put a sled in front of an athlete, you should be thinking, this is the most technical thing I'm going to do all day. It's in front of them, it's heavy, it must be something that improves technique. If I just want this dog to work, I'm going to put the sled behind them. And I'm going to do this because it allows me to externally decrease the velocity the athlete's moving rather than telling a guy whose goal to go fast to go on purpose slow. The same idea in powerlifting. I'd never want to slowly move through the concentric phase of a lift. I could do a dozen things to make myself move slower through the concentric and learn to grind or battle or whatnot, but I never want to tell a guy who wants to run fast, hey, run this, but run it at 70% for me. So instead, what would I do? I would just apply enough resistance to decrease his velocity by, 15% or so. And when we do this over enough distance, it allows that athlete to stay in those strides just a little bit longer and feel that transition. If you can smoothly transition from acceleration to max velocity with resistance behind you, you're not going to hit what we talked about, which is that parachute effect of all of a sudden I get up and now I feel the belt pulling against me. I've projected my hips forward, I've smoothly transitioned to max velocity, and I should almost forget that the resistance is even there. I'm just moving a little bit slower, just enough to build the awareness around those positions.
No, I mean, the natural transition is into max velocity now. And it seems like I look at max velocity almost like a Turkish getup, where it's like, okay, there's so many demands to get to the final point that as long as you kind of get all of the pieces together, you're more or less going to be in the right position. So there's a cumulative effect of potential inefficient positions that add up and stack from your setup to your first step to your acceleration phase to your transition phase. When someone is now arrived at a more vertical displacement and they're in what we would consider max velocity posture, where does your attention go?
I think it goes to at say whatever distance that race might be. We'll use the 40-yard dash, for example. At what point in that race do they arrive at that position? And then from a effort and output standpoint, how long are they able to maintain that velocity that they got to? And the biggest thing, when we're running short distance races, the 40-yard dash, or the 60-meter sprint indoor, or the 60-yard dash for a baseball test, is that I need to try to make the race as short as possible. And what I mean by that is I need to get to max velocity at the latest point in the race, as close to the goal as possible. I need to get up, because the minute I get there, I'm losing speed, right? Once you get to max velocity, no one can maintain true max velocity for that long. Everybody's job in acceleration is to just delay the point in which they get there so they don't have to maintain it as long as the next guy does. I want to stay accelerating long enough that when I get up, I'm like, oh, there's only 10 yards left in this race. Rather than get up and stand up at 15 yards and go, I have to go 25 miles an hour for how long?
Right.
So that's really the first thing we look at is like, where did this guy get to max velocity? And max velocity won't necessarily be as much a speed as what you mentioned is it's a position. So, and that's what people don't realize. Once you're vertical, it's max velocity. I don't care if it's not going fast, it's what it is. So if I look and you're stood up at the 15, I know by the 28th yard, it's over for you. Whereas if the guy next to you gets up at the 28th yard, he's getting to 40. We might get to 35 and start to slow down, but you slow down at the 28, he slowed down at the 35. So we really need to delay it as long as possible. And most guys will be able to accelerate based on how strong they are and how ultimately fast they're going to go. They'll get to 15 yards pretty close to staying in their acceleration. Now, if they smoothly transition out of acceleration, we should be able to buy about 25 yards from most guys, and then the race is 15 yards long. Just get in it and try really hard for 15 yards.
I think coming to the end of that, my mind immediately goes to, okay, in a vacuum of a single bout, we look at that, we can kind of take into consideration these are the cues, these are the positions, these are the big rocks through the different stages of a let's call it a race. From a programming perspective, I want you to kind of shine some light on just the intensity of this type of training, the recovery demand, and the frequency. Because I think the problem with sprinting is that it's running. And we kind of like learn running like Forrest Gump era jogging. And you're just like, it's sort of this seen as this benign form of exercise with a low barrier of entry. And I think all people do is they look at sprinting like fast running, and they start to treat it with the same level of frequency and in volume, and they don't really respect the recovery demands of this style of training. Now, when speed development becomes your, maybe not your sole focus, but one of your primary outcomes in a training block, how are you relaying and communicating the duration of a session, the density of work in a session, the amount of sessions in a particular week, like going macro with common mistakes in coaching sprinting? Where are you seeing those big rocks, and like what is your course of action to try and remediate some of the issues that you see from a coaching perspective around programming sprinting?
Yeah, so I think a big thing is two things. Number one thing would be identifying your athlete. If you have a slow person, let's look at it this way. I think if we phrase it a certain way, everyone will understand it, I hope, immediately, and I'll seem like a genius. If we think of it like strength training, and we assume all of us are listening to this know the entry level kind of admission into strength training, we've all heard of like Prilipin's chart. We all have a rough idea of like, okay, most strength training programs I've ever done are 24 to 25 reps of a movement. It's 4x6 or 6x4 or whatever in and above 80%. If we understand that and we look at sprinting, if we apply that same logic that, a maximal effort, a sub-maximal effort bout of efficient work in the gym for strength probably caps out at 24 to 25 reps. Around 70 to 75% is work. You do 5x5 at 75%, you're probably worked. Now, if you go out and sprint and you're a average person, you're probably doing that 5x5. Now, a couple moments ago, we discussed how many steps are in the first 10 yards of sprinting. About 7.5. So if we looked at that, you're probably getting 4 10-yard sprints out of a regular person anywhere in something that's efficient and recoverable. Because this person's hitting, probably on average, as a joke athlete, 75% of their max power into the ground with poor technique in that 10 yards. If you put that into perspective, you take anyone who's never sprinted before, they get 4 10-yard sprints and they're done. And they're probably taking 2.5, 3, 5 minutes in between them to even just touch 75%. And then they need to take like 3 days off. In and around that, we can use resistance, right? We can put a speed sack, chains on them, or if you're a millionaire, a 1080 sprint on them and decrease the velocity they travel at and do some capacity work at longer distances. But they are sprinting 4 10-yard bouts. That's all they're getting. Now, imagine you get top 4 wide receiver in the NFL in the offseason who went to an SEC school and is, widely lauded as probably one of the fastest wide receiver ones out there. Well, now we have a guy where now I'm not thinking he's going 5 steps each at 75%. His first step is a top set. It's a 100% max out rep. And every subsequent step is a drop down set for him. So he might get 1, maybe 2 10-yard sprints in a workout with even more rest because his first step is 100. His second step is 95. His third step is 85. His fourth step is 80. He gets through the 10 and he's done a pyramid set now of rear foot elevated barbell split squats if I think about it in a weight room sense. I have to think to myself, we take 5 minutes, maybe you go back and hit that again, but we're probably done. And my second rep, probably a lot lighter than my first. So you get an average person, I would say, look at it just simply in strength training terms. Every time they hit the ground is going to be exponential of their body weight force into the ground on a single leg. An average person who's not that great at putting out full effort, maybe they give me 75% effort, RPE 7. If we're getting 4, maybe 5 10-yard sprints out of them, and that's as many steps as they can give me, after that, they're going from here straight to the basement in terms of intensity. But if you get someone who's really, really, really fast, dude, it's over. I've been at the field, and I know you've been out there, and listen, if I could tell you the people I've stood out at a field with in 107-degree weather in Central Florida, it would blow your mind. And I've never seen a group of the most talented athletes in the whole world do less in 90 minutes than these guys because they go so fast. They go so fast to the point we needed to bring the 1080 out just to get any amount of work done. Because you get 2 reps and you're like, well, I'm probably going to shut it down for today. He went 19 miles an hour already.
Yeah, that's great. And you bring up an interesting point too, which I think, a lot of people hearing this and maybe thinking about it for the first time are just going to be blown away by, the efficiency of stimulus per unit effort, right? Like every step, when you frame it that way, it's like, yeah, dude, like imagine a 1 RM, like that's what you're aiming for on that first step. And just knowing that, maybe your position or maybe your strength or your capacity, it's like, we're always aiming for 100. We're always aiming for that max effort, and what's left of the tank at the end of the day after a bout of 10 yards, it's like, well, not much, especially if you're a novice. But that, if your first 7 strides are all 100%, it's like, well, you're doing 2 efforts tops, and you're going to overcook them. How is it then? And because I think overcooking it is something that early days strength coaches, when they start to transition to good athletes, is they think the capacity is higher, right? They think they can do more when they are doing more. They're just doing it in less time and less distance. How do you then factor in the weight training component to this type of exercise, given the recovery debt of just these skillful bouts, especially when they're done at high speeds? How do you start to factor in where to start to fill in the gaps with weights? Because the paradigm shifts where the weights are now the adjunct to the skill of the speed development, which is likely an adjunct to a further part of their game, unless they're just pure sprinters. Like, how do we switch gears now into the weight room and go, right, novice people are going to look to do this and build these attributes, where our speedsters, we're going to have to take these considerations given the amount of recovery that they've already accumulated.
Yeah, and I think that's where, the weight room, I never want to make the weight room sound more specific than it is general. Because, at the end of the day, it's unfortunate because, I'm a weight room guy, and now I get to, be a speed guy because, people who know a lot have kind of said I get to do that, and that's really cool. And then I go back in the weight room and I'm like, oh man, this is way cooler out there. But, you have an opportunity to support speed coaches as a strength and conditioning coach by not getting goofy with your exercise selection, but getting hyper specific, like being the Chris Kyle of the weight room. You know what I mean? And it's you got a guy coming in and you're like, okay, I have wide receiver 1, 6'2", 176 pounds. I have Super Bowl winning running back, 6'2", 250 pounds. Maybe more sometimes, maybe less other times. These two guys were at the field doing the same thing, running the same speeds, talking shit to me, sweating, just standing there holding on to the 1080 with my sprint spikes in the ground so it didn't rip off the ground. Now I have to think to myself, these guys did the same work outside. Now they're in the weight room. There's no way they handle the same amount. Well, guess what? Light, quick, wide receiver 1 guy who weighs 176 pounds needs to get stronger. I don't care if you tell me he's strong. He's got to get stronger for a multitude of reasons. So his entire workout is just going to say absolute strength, and it's going to be eccentrically dominant. It's going to be isometrically dominant, and we're going to live and die there. And even in my exercise selection, I'm going to live and die. There's going to be really no concentric phase to things, or there's going to be assistance in the concentric phase. The range of motion might be different. The exercise selection can be wildly different, because now I'm going into the weight room and I'm going, okay, I get 25 more reps with this individual, but I'm going to cut out half of the loaded or half of the challenging range of motion. Now with this between 240 and 260 pound freak that no one has ever seen anybody do this before in their entire life on any given day. So we have this running back, won a Super Bowl, arguably, probably the greatest college running back of all time. There's no question. He is. He sets the rushing record in the SEC. He's out at the field watching guys prepare for the combine. They've spent 11 weeks preparing for this moment of their life, dying over tenths of a second, and he goes, hey, you think I can run 4.5 right now? Sure, why not? He goes, okay, bet. Gets in what I could only tell you is O-lineman stance, because he somehow forgot what a three-point stance is. Takes off and runs 4.54, 1 p.m. in the afternoon. I have to tell
what do you do? What do you do with a guy like that in the weight room? You know what I mean?
What do you do with this guy? You know what you do? You give him something so he just goes home, right? So he gets in the weight room, he puts on his newest pair of Asics that he got, and we do 2 sets.
G-Money Sniper. G-Money Sniper.
G-Money Sniper got him on lock. You know what I mean? He rolls in the newest sneaker politics released, straight out of Baton Rouge. And it's all right, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do 2x3 power clean. We're going to do some 2-to-1 box blast. and you're good for the rest of the day. He's going to be concentrically oriented. Why? He weighs 250 pounds. He runs faster than I've ever seen anyone run in my entire life. I can only imagine to run that fast at that body weight, he's putting 5 times plus his body weight in the ground on one leg. He doesn't need to get stronger. His one leg weighed 1,100 pounds today. So what do we do in the weight room? Move quick, move fast, get a little bit of a sweat going. Put him on the treadmill at 3.5 incline at 5.5 speed and let him walk for 35 minutes.
Yeah. That if you're not asking that question, what do we do with this guy? When you're around elite athletes, you're not thinking deep enough, especially if they are at their core speed athletes. Like it's such a that's such a like a universal phenomenon when you're around, because you do contrast a really interesting bookend where the 176-pound speedster that's just going to create distance in the backfield like no one else versus the guy that's just going to run literally through a wall and keep running. Both of those pose the question of what do we do, right? Like what, because the question comes from you're not thinking you're going to make them better. And I think that's the humility of a strength coach that works with really good athletes. Is like, I am not going to come in on some hubris white horse and think like, hey, the specifics are, can we give, I think this is a you analogy, the iPad and the core work. Like, can we give the kid the iPad so he shuts the fuck up in the car ride? And the weight room becomes the car ride home. And it's just like, give them something that isn't going to overcook these different engines and these different chassis. And it's a question that I don't think people approach with the humility required to come up with whatever the right answer is. Because the right answer is that he can do that. Like the right answer is he can come in cold, not having to run a 40 in 7 years or whatever, however long he's been in the league, and step up and go 4.54 mid off season in his finest off season, 250 pound plus form. And I think that's such a lesson, like that humility to just kind of throw the paper in the air and just go like, what book are we reading? What research is on this guy, right? Like, frog soup and beignets, and we're running fucking, we're running 4 or 5. So it's such a good point. And I want to kind of transition now into talking about speed camp, because it's like, I think one of the things that makes good speed coaches more than strength coaches, and I see this, and it's true when you get to hang around speed coaches, you get to go, whether it's combine setting, where they're around the 40s or at Olympic level, the understanding of a speed oriented strength coach that I think makes for a good strength coach is the understanding of that humility of like, look, we can know the X's and O's a little bit and the shapes and the techniques and what we're looking for, but at a certain point, I think no subsection of sports, and I would go as far to say sports medicine at large, and I put strength and conditioning in sports medicine, has a respect for an athlete like a speed coach does. Like a respect for like we're just happy to be here. We just actually kind of want to watch. Like I want to see him. Can we sell tickets to this? Like that's wild. And so I think I want to talk about speed camp, because I know it's coming up here in September, and because I think one of the benefits of getting with you and Yo is that humility piece. But I want you to kind of talk a little bit about what you guys got going on in September, and who's it for, what they're going to get out of it, and what you think the key takeaways for a weekend like this is.
Yeah, so I think we've been able to curate a really unique opportunity in that in September 19th, 20th, and 21st, you can come to speed camp, and it's geared towards coaches, and it's not a trip to the fucking zoo. You know what I mean? Like, this is not a safari. Don't bring your telephoto lens. You're the animal in the cage. You know what I mean? So it's like, you get to come out and you get to go on the turf, go on the track, get in the weight room, and you get to build, like you said, humility, I think, largely comes from empathy, right? Like, humility is the most human emotion we can have in the least human way. Like, I'm rewatching True Detective. I know this is a sidebar. This could have been a great plug, and it's going to be the worst plug of all time.
This is the best Killian podcast of all time. We're on True Detective now. Amazing.
So, me and Raquel are watching episode 1 of True Detective, and there's this scene, and Woody Harrelson's in the car with Russ Cole, Matthew McConaughey's character, and he asks him, "Hey man, are you a Christian?" And he's like, "No." And Woody Harrelson's like, well, this is going to be a long car ride. And he's like, I'm a pessimist. And he's like, I think the worst thing that ever happened to people is they learn to have a sense of self, right? And it's like, I'm like, uh-oh, here's me and Shallow in a car ride, and I'm Matthew McConaughey, and Woody Harrelson's like, hey, man, you know what the car is for? Silent reflection. I'm like, I've been in the car with Shallow, and this is happening. But it's so funny because, you know, the greatest human emotion you can have is empathy, is understanding how someone else feels and not judging how that person feels that way. And then, you know, on top of empathy, you can't have humility without empathy. You can't let go of yourself without just understanding the kind of global human condition. And to your point about being a speed coach and having empathy, having humility, you know, it comes from empathy. Because, you know, when myself and you know, I'm very grateful I get to go out there with Yo, when we're out there, like, combine is 7:30, 8:30 a.m. in the day. It's still hot and it's early. But when you're off season with NFL vets and these guys are professionals, it's 12:30 in the afternoon and it's 98 degrees and I'm sweating, dragging equipment out of my car. And it's like, in that moment, you need to be so empathetic to how that person feels doing a warm-up drill, running a 10-yard, running a 100-yard. And that empathy gives you that humility. You can really step back, and you're not a coach anymore. You're not a position of authority telling anyone what to do. You're in that moment as a speed coach, even more than being in the weight room. I feel so much more that I'm just there to care about this individual. During combine, my job is to manage emotions more than anything else. I'm surrounded by 28 of the most incredible young athletes in the entire world that are going to do something that literally no one else can do. Like, no one else can do. Here's the thing. Anybody can go and play golf, and you get one stroke where you feel like you're on the PGA Tour. There are 0 people in the world that can go stand there and run a 40 at all close to what these guys can do, and you definitely can't play corner. So to go out there and stand with these people that are in the less than 1% of the population of the world and have them fight for something that's challenging for them, all you're doing as a speed coach is watching how that guy looks when he decelerates and turns around, and knowing if you kind of fudge the numbers a little bit today or if you give him to it honest. That's literally the hardest part of my entire job, is going, do I tell him it was the 10th faster, or am I honest with him today? That's the only thing I ever sweat about in my job. And that, as a coach, is the hardest thing to do. But you don't know how to do that unless you've been out there at 98 degrees and you've tried doing the fucking thing. You know, and speed camp is 3 days, and there's going to be a little bit of education. There's going to be a lot of education. There's a little bit of conventional education. We're going to get in a room. I'm going to pull up a slideshow. We're going to go through first principles, the cognitive concepts behind sprinting, the shin angles, the positions, the awareness, how long you should accelerate for, how long you should stay on the ground for, what you should be looking for as a coach. But then we're going to go out to a field in 98-degree weather, and you're going to go mock drill on the track and then 1080 sprint for 10 yards. And you're going to compete against all of your peers, people who are also coaches. And there's no better vacuum to build physical empathy than being on the field in that heat, surrounded by your peers, all collectively experiencing what I could only imagine is strength and conditioning hell week.
I love it, man. And it's, you know what, it's everything that you're about, everything that Yo's about, everything that we're about is like, it's an experience, because that's what education is. It's really a learning experience, and I'm stoked for it. And, you know, I think it'll be a staple out there in Tampa for years to come. So, you know, all the registration info for Speed Camp is going to be in the show notes. Obviously, you can reach out to myself, or you can reach out to Killian directly. And, you know, set your calendars September 19th, 20th, and 21st out at YMP in Tampa, Florida. You know, we'll put it all up on socials and all that. So we're really excited to get that underway, man. You know, hopefully be able to see you out there.